film. This is not a film. I'm not talking about movies, I'm talking about a book. Hello to all my YouTube friends out there. It's Bells. We're gonna talk about the 11 best books that I read this summer. This has been a fantastic reading year in general for me, and obviously I've been reading a lot of really good books. Hopefully some of them will be new and I can introduce you to some new stuff, and honestly, I just want to gush about all of these. So we're just gonna bring on the books. Let's go. So first I want to talk about one of the best, if not the best, romance book I've ever read in my entire life, and that is The Kiss Quotient. If you haven't read this book for whatever reason, oh my god, go read it. The summary is that Stella, our protagonist, is really bad at dating, doesn't enjoy dating, and so she hires an escort, Michael, our other protagonist, to teach her all of the sexy things that she feels like she needs to know in order to be successful as a girlfriend. And obviously, romance and hilarity ensue. Oh my god. So I want to preface this with I am really picky about romances. I find a lot of books in the romance genre really seem to enjoy taking toxic relationships and romanticizing them, or glamorizing like unconsensual kisses and really rough sex and sexuality without any consent on either side, any respect. I have a lot of issues with that, and I find most romances that I actually enjoy are usually like fantasies where the romance is a subplot and is not 100% the focus. So I don't really enjoy a lot of just romance books. So this answers all of those prayers, every single one. And then it gave me even more. I'm a huge advocate for sex workers and sex workers' rights, so the fact that this is also about a sex worker is great. They are respectful to each other. He's super respectful about all of Stella's boundaries. Even though she originally hires him for sex, he can tell, like in that first scene, I promise this is not a spoiler, that she's not comfortable with it, so he doesn't do that. Oh my god. And what's even cooler is that this author, in her acknowledgements at the end, she states that this was one of the first books where she really felt like she was writing about herself. And you can really see that. Stella has high-functioning autism. The book really revolves around a lot of different interesting themes revolving mental health and the presentation and expectation we have of individuals in our modern society and how that kind of reflects upon individuals who aren't neurotypical. I didn't know that Helen herself has high-functioning autism. Reading it at the end, it's so clear in every facet of the story, just how truthful all of these relationships, all of these experiences are. And on the other hand, Michael is half Vietnamese and half Swedish, I believe. He lives with a traditional Vietnamese family, so there's a lot of other cultural expectations that he has to deal with that then Stella walks into. And so both are kind of battling with expectations from their parents, expectations from society. It's kind of the themes of how people are in real life isn't how they necessarily present themselves. Every human being has layers, right? Like we're in Shrek, right? Onions have layers, people have layers. The supporting characters are really beautiful. Her writing is just really open and honest. The spicy scenes are great. The actual romance is really romantic. It's just a really sweet story. I didn't even know that it was a trilogy until after I finished it. I like devoured it in one sitting. So I will absolutely be reading the next two as soon as I can get my hands on them. I am super excited. It was great. 100 stars. I'm gonna buy it. I'm gonna read it again, and you should read it too. So on the theme of romance, the next book I'll talk about is The Lovely, The Hyped, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Man, guys, this book made me cry like a baby. I was like just wandering around my apartment for like an hour after I finished this book, just like sobbing. My poor partner did not know what to do with me. This again is like, you've probably seen this book, you probably know what it's about. But if you don't, just briefly, it's the story of Evelyn Hugo, who is a Hollywood movie icon who has had 7 different husbands in her life, obviously. And so she wants to tell the full story of her glamorous life, but only if it will be written by a certain writer, Monique. It's a story about love and mistakes and ambition and life. I don't want to spoil who the actual love interest is if you haven't read it or you haven't heard about it, but I would say it's a damn good romance story. So, okay, there's something to be said about being able to write a story that feels as intimate as this one does. When I think about like a decent romance, oftentimes it's something like The Kiss Quotient, where I really just like thoroughly enjoy the story. I love watching the characters. I love seeing them interact. It's almost like watching a movie. This one is a little bit different. Some of the scenes that she describes feel almost uncomfortable. It feels almost voyeuristic to be watching them or reading them. There were definitely a number of scenes between Evelyn and her love interest where I almost felt like I didn't want to know what was going to happen. They hurt each other quite a bit. It's truly heartbreaking. The best part about this book is the female characters. We need all these complicated female characters. We need to know that women are full people. Every woman is a myriad of different things, including the expectations that are put on her. I think Reid does a lovely job at kind of illuminating the expectations that we put on women, especially women in the spotlight. Obviously, as Evelyn is our major protagonist of the story, we see the pressure that she's under. And I know that a lot of celebrities have come out recently talking about this pressure, and I don't know how much it hits home because they are just so separated, and my cat's gonna use the litter box and we're gonna wait. I don't know what I was talking about. While neither of the characters are perfect, I don't love Monique's character and I don't love Evelyn's character, but I do feel like they are both full people. Every person in this book feels like a full person. I think that's really important. Even the supporting characters, even the people who show up for just a couple of pages out of this book, have a real impact on the way that the story goes. And I think that's really true to life as well, is that someone who's in your life for a very short amount of time might have a massive impact. You never know. I know one of my friends remarked that this book is really poorly edited, and thinking about it, maybe it was, but I think it's kind of designed to feel like you're having a conversation with this person, because I think that it was clearly the purpose and the style of the book. I think it was totally fine. Yeah, it's not like literary fiction, but it is a really good story, and the way that the story is told absolutely serves the plot and the themes very, very well. I'm just one of another million who say, go read this book, go read The Kiss Quotient, read them both, enjoy the romances. Yeah, let's move on. All right, so this next book has been one of my favorite books since I was like 16. So it was a reread for me this year, but it's also the only book I have in a physical copy. Yay for the library. River God by Wilbur Smith. This is a historical fiction set in ancient Egypt. It follows the life of the slave Tata and his, I guess, owner, Lady Lostrous, and her forbidden lover, Tanis. Egypt is plunged into chaos when a neighboring country invades with really powerful war apparati, chariots, spears, you know, the like, very specific and advanced war technology that they didn't have. And so they're forced to flee. The best way I can describe this book is that it is a saga through ancient Egypt. It is love and grief and power and greed, adventure. They go on a trip up the Nile to see where the Nile begins. It's just a beautiful story, and the prose is fantastic. Now, in particular, I think this book really succeeds because it's real. So at the very end of the novel, we know that Tata places scrolls into a tomb. And so these actual scrolls were found in a tomb off of the Nile in the Valley of the Gods, Valley of the Nobles. Dr. Duraid ibn al-Sima basically read these scrolls and called up Wilbur Smith and was like, hey, you're a well-known African writer. Would you please write this story in a way that the whole world can understand and love, because the story deserves to be told. But the story is from Tata's perspective. Tata was real. This story was real and beautiful, and I don't know how to describe it without just like really gushing about it. The characters of Lostrous and Tanis, it's a very almost like Romeo and Juliet-esque story without the warring factions. You gotta read the book, you gotta know. I'm not gonna spoil it. But they're not allowed to be together. But they decide to be together anyways, and so that's a whole other problem. I don't know, I would assume that it's got a lot of historical accuracies. I don't know a lot about ancient Egypt, I just know I think it's cool. It is a long book. I mean, it doesn't look that long if you look at this, but like, the pages are pretty big and the writing is pretty small. I would say if it feels like a bit of a slow start, give it a chance because it truly is one of the most adventurous, magical, romantic stories. Wow, all three of these were romances, and I started this off by saying I don't read a lot of romances. But see, this is what I mean. The romance is like a subplot. Anyway, there is a whole series. I'm gonna be doing a whole review on the whole series in a few weeks, so keep posted for that video. You can click the little bell to get notifications for when I talk about that, and it's gonna be a little less gushy because most of that series is actually really bad. So it's gonna be more of a rant review. If that interests you at all, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you can hear me yell about books more. But I do absolutely 100% at least recommend you read the first one. So moving on. I finally read The Shining. By Stephen King. I've seen the movie already, and I've read a couple of other Stephen King books before, but I'd never read this one. Honestly, I was kind of scared too. Guys, it's really good. I'm sure I don't have to tell you that, but holy moly, is it freaking good. If you don't know the story, Jack Torrance is a previous alcoholic. He gets a job as a caretaker of the mysterious Overlook Hotel, goes and stays there over the winter with his wife and son, Danny, who is 5 years old, who has something known as the Shining. It's like a psychic ability. Wicked, evil, mysterious antics ensue. I actually think this book should be really boring. The way that Stephen King writes lends itself to this obviously like slow burn type of story, this sense of isolation. He's a very detailed writer and he's very precise. So everything that's discussed in the book, all of the descriptions are long and they're really good. So we're lucky that they're really good, because I think if not, man, some of the like, let's watch Jack sift through newspapers for 50 pages. It winds up being really scary. The sense of isolation, I read it when it was kind of cloudy here over the summer. I don't know why I read these things over the summer. But it was kind of cloudy here and like doom and gloom, and I was like curled up on the couch and I was freaking out. I actually found that the most interesting thing is the character of Wendy. In the movie, Jack is obviously the main character and we get a really solid understanding of Danny. But Wendy, the first time I watched it, it kind of just felt like all she did was run around and scream. The best part about the book is that we have the opportunity to go into the perspectives of Danny, of Jack, and of Wendy. So we can actually like feel her thought process as she's watching her husband essentially go crazy. It's so rich, I think is the word. The sense of craziness and anger and hurt is like very powerful. Poor Danny has to go through so much. That sense of isolation really did get to me after a little while. I think if you read this when you were like snowed in or had a snow day, or overnight if you're staying at a hotel or something, I think it could legitimately freak you out. And I just really marvel at horror writers. It's just like so impressive how terrifying you can be without jump scares, without music, without facial reactions, without all of the things that go into like horror movies. Writers can't do that. They have to just think about something scary and be able to relay that to someone without, you know, getting so scared that they stop writing it completely. I think it's incredible, and The Shining was great. I'm like the kind of person who likes to feel unique and special and not jump on the hype train, but he's a good writer, what can I say? So expect me to talk about more Stephen King books in the future. Now we're gonna jump into the 3 non-fiction 5-star books that I read. The first one we'll talk about is A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. Viktor E. Frankl was a psychiatrist who was interned in the Nazi death camps during the Holocaust. It's more of an essay than it is a book, but he writes this essay about his daily experiences in the camps and basically trying to answer the question of why, when him and everyone who was around him have lost their families, have lost their belongings, have lost any sense of a successful future, and could possibly die at any minute of any day, why they would continue to live. What is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of life? He argues that we can't avoid suffering, but what we can do is decide how we approach that suffering, how we can find meaning in it, and how we can move past it with a purpose. He was originally interned in Auschwitz, but was then moved to one of the smaller camps. So something he says in the beginning is that what he details in this book, those day-to-day experiences, were very typical of the smaller camps. Rather than portraying his experiences as statistics or numbers, instead kind of just talks about the day-to-day life, his different jobs, the tasks that they went through, how much food they had every day. It's the most I've ever been able to actually see what that was like and kind of truly imagine myself being in that situation. I could really tell that his purpose was to emphasize how he discovered how he himself wanted to live, and then discussed that with other people around him and why they themselves wanted to live. I don't think I would be able to give a good description of what that is from his perspective. He talks about many different things. The meaning of life is different for a lot of different people. We're also individuals, so obviously things like that are not going to be the same for everyone. I think if I had to sum up this book in one sentence, it would just be as required reading for the human race, and just leave it at that. It's not a self-help book. It will probably make you feel sad and uncomfortable, but I do think it's remarkably uplifting. On that note, I read something quite similar to that, which has been pretty popular this year. It's called Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. The thesis of this book is basically to demonstrate how the American racial hierarchy is a hidden caste system, similar to the Indian caste system and similar to the Nazi Germany caste system that was created there. She links the three empires, I guess, together, and then talks about like the major 8 pillars of the caste systems by using stories about particular people, groups, and of course her own experiences as a Black woman living in the United States. At the end of the book, she gives ways for America to kind of move forward out of this hierarchical system. If you live in America, or if America has affected you or your life in any way, shape, or form, I think you should read this. I found it incredibly insightful. It is an incredibly detailed account of the history of slavery in the United States. One of the craziest things that I learned, that I tell to anybody who asks me, is that the Nazis actually used the American slavery system as a baseline for how to treat the Jews in their legal practices and their bills and their laws. They used the American system as how to do that, and then went, oh man, those Americans are a little crazy though, let's not go that far. That's not for me to downplay, obviously, what happened in Nazi Germany, but rather to just give you some perspective on how horrible, which we all know it's horrible, but like, oh my god, the state of slavery in the United States. There is a huge portion of it that is devoted just simply to stories about slavery, stories about Black America. It's very difficult to read, and I truly recommend that you take your time to read it, because we should be uncomfortable learning about history. We should especially be uncomfortable learning about that history, and especially be uncomfortable learning about how it affects our day-to-day life today. It's clearly incredibly well researched. The addition of adding at the end, like, hey, it doesn't have to be this way, here's how we can fix it, is a great stance for that kind of a book to make. You know, I don't ever want to think that we're stuck repeating history. I don't believe we are. I think that we learn about history so that that does not happen. And this book is an incredibly fantastic way of illustrating that in every facet. I highly recommend it. It's a heavy read, so be prepared for it. But when you do get it, purchase a physical copy. I didn't. I listened to it on an audiobook, and I wish that I had had a physical copy to write notes all over and reminders and dog ear the pages and highlight the whole thing, because I'd love to have been able to go back to that and see how that progresses over time. I would recommend putting it on your bookshelf, highlighting the hell out of it. Yeah. Okay, so the last of my 5-star picks from the summer was The Library Book by Susan Orlean. This book has a really special place in my heart. It is a nonfiction that weaves the history of the Los Angeles Central Library fire, which is the most catastrophic fire to have ever occurred in a library in the United States. It weaves the history of that with the history of the library itself, and with the true crime and mystery surrounding who set the Los Angeles Central Library fire. I would describe it as a love letter to library lovers, or a love letter to book lovers. This book kind of like fell into my lap. It was just available immediately at the library, and so I thought I would try it out. I never thought I'd be that interested in how libraries ran. I never thought I would really care. I knew how important libraries are to a community, and even to myself. I mean, obviously I read 95% of my books through the libraries. I didn't expect to be so thoroughly fascinated with them as I was while listening to this book. I think partly that is Susan Orlean's writing. She is just a frickin' master. Like, I haven't read her other books, although I plan on it. I think she might be my favorite nonfiction writer of all time because the way that she describes people, like I was an actor. I used to read hundreds of character descriptions a week for auditions. I've read scripts, I've read books, I've watched movies. Her one-line character descriptions or people descriptions, they're not characters, they're like real people that she met and learned about, are so specific that I could see the person standing in front of me. Along with that, I mean, her depiction of the Central Library fire literally brought me to tears. I cried like multiple times just because of the way that she wrote around these events was just so beautiful. Her writing and her clear adoration for libraries, it's very obvious and it's very funny because while I was reading this book, I really started to fall in love with the idea of being a librarian myself. So after trying to figure it out, I actually changed my degree completely to an English and cultural anthropology double major. And my goal is I would like to go and get my master's in library science to go work at a library. And I actually think that this book did wonders for illustrating what that would look like for me because she illustrated, you know, the day-to-day life of it so incredibly well. I was really impressed, and I think that if you love books, if you read from the library, oh my god, you deserve to read this book. Like, it's like a treat for you. It was a treat for me. You should just like sit down with a cup of tea within sight of your bookshelves, or like put a bookshelf picture on your like TV or something super dorky, and just sit in awe of the wonder that is books. Anyway. It's so good, guys. You really should read it. So those are all of my 5-star picks. So those were the best of the best. I had literally no problems with any of them in my mind. They are all perfect books that perfectly accomplished what they were set out to do. Now I've got 4 honorable mentions. These are like my 4.5 stars. This would have been perfect except for this one thing, and that I will still absolutely love to read again. So yeah, drink some water. I'm talking a lot. So I kind of want to just breeze a little bit through this part. I know I've been talking for a while. First book on this honorable mentions list is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. So The Night Circus is about a circus. The circus is basically a front for the magical duel of 2 magicians, Celia and Marco, and their masters or teachers or mentors or whatever. Basically, the people who train them in magic have this like centuries-long bet that they can train a better apprentice than their counterpart. They get them from a young age. They let them know pretty quickly that, you know, they're going to be in this game. There's not a lot of rules, but they just have to win. The problem with these 2 is that this circus is the battleground for these 2. They wind up meeting and falling in love. Dun dun dun! I loved this. It was so magical. It felt like an adult fairy tale. The best part about it is just a few times throughout the book, Erin Morgenstern does this thing where she is putting you in the perspective of a circus goer. So she draws you through the circus. It really just cemented all that love that I had for the circus that was already percolating throughout the entire story. She just did such a good job at making it so magical, and the characters are so specific, and all of their talents, like their circus talents, are so cool. We have contortionists, fire breathers, psychics, fortune tellers, like the whole 9 yards, and everything you couldn't have even imagined. She has such a beautiful imagination. I was never bored reading this book. My only issue, the only reason it doesn't get 5 stars, is that the ending is like real, let's tie it with a bow. I don't know what's wrong with me. Just a happy ending that's so like clean cut is just a little boring for me. I want the hope of a tumultuous future. Maybe I'm just bitter. But it suited the story, and I'm not like super mad about it to the point where I wouldn't read it again. It was still really good. So you should still check it out if you love that sense of magical realism, magic in real life. Moving right along. Next, we have Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This book was so good. It's a classic for a reason. It's a gothic romance. The main character is a young woman who is nameless throughout the story. Socially awkward, very young. She falls in love with this mysterious older man, marries him, goes to live with him in his isolated mansion on the coast, where she learns that his mysterious dead first wife is still everywhere. And she just constantly feels inadequate in comparison to Rebecca, his first wife. We essentially watch this poor young girl obsess more and more over his wife and they drift apart. As in every lovely Gothic story, there's this sense of isolation. It's very dreary. It's a very slow burn story. There's a bit of a mystery attached to it. Look, it was just beautiful. This book was absolutely stunning. The mystery is intriguing, although I did guess the twist early on, which is too bad. I wish I didn't, but that's okay. It's not like a thriller where the twist is like the big selling point of the book. This book is really about the journey. It's very clear that it's about the journey because the way that it's written, as our young nameless character falls into more obsession over Rebecca, I felt I was like obsessing more and more over the book. Like, it's a book I think about once a week. The only thing that really put me off a little is that our main character, she's a little dull. I mean, she's very young, she's very naive, and that's kind of a big plot point of the story. She isn't super likable in the beginning to me, but I do think it grows on you as you understand more about her and the experience in the house as a whole. The payoff is so good. It did not end how I expected it to, and I think it was really good. On the note of Rebecca, I refuse to watch the movie with Armie Hammer in it, but if you have seen it, I would love to know what you felt about it, if you've like read the book and watched the movie, if you felt that it did it justice, because maybe I'll change my mind. I can't find the Hitchcock version from the 60s anywhere, so that would be great. If you've seen the new one, if you liked it, let me know. I'm very curious. So the next book I want to talk about is Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. This was my first Murakami and I loved it. I thought it was really just stunning. It's basically a story about a young man's first love and the death of their mutual best friend. So Toru is a very serious, quiet college student who falls in love with his dead best friend's former girlfriend, Naoko. It's kind of a story about romance. While Toru expands his horizons, Naoko retreats into herself. It's definitely a story about mental health. It's a story about grief. This is like the perfect book to read. Not like a thunderstorm. Like, I would not recommend you read this with like lightning and thunder going on, but like that slow drizzle where it feels like it's never been sunny ever before and it never will be again. All you've known is like gray and drizzle. That was the vibe of this book. It's like weirdly comforting. The relationship between these two is really complicated, and I think that Murakami did a beautiful job at illustrating the nature of relationships that are not straightforward, that have all this baggage to them. I also really enjoyed the seemingly like effortless flow through time that he created. It's like you're sitting in a river and just like the story is just very smoothly moving along, if that makes sense. This reminded me actually a little bit of 500 Days of Summer, and I'll tell you why. It's all from Toru's perspective, so it's his outlook on the world. Because I've never read another Murakami, I don't have another thing to bounce this off of, but the biggest thing that I bumped up against with this was just the descriptions of the female characters. They were a little shallow. I would not go so far as to say that they were objectifying in any way, but I would say that Toru's perspective on women is not the best. He clearly doesn't see them as full, complicated beings, and I think that's part of his struggle in this story, is to learn that women are full people too. I do think that it was a stylistic choice to write it in that way, to kind of show the development of Toru in the same way that 500 Days of Summer is from the male protagonist's perspective, and you're kind of supposed to end like not feeling super great about him. And I really like the complicatedness of that. I really liked the bleakness of this story. It's just like a weirdly comforting, nostalgic, like very sad story about mental health and grief and your experiences. It's a coming of age story. I think it was really lovely. I would absolutely recommend it to anyone who's looking for something to make them think, but in a passive way. It feels like something I could read over and over and over again and always feel like it was new, which I think is a really cool thing to say about a book. So the last one we're going to talk about, one of the wildest stories I read this summer, was Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky, which you may have known as the writer of The Perks of Being a Wallflower. This is not that book. So this story took him 9 years to write, and it is a horror book. It is frightening. I will never look at deer the same way ever again, and I can't explain to you why, because that would spoil it. The summary is that this single mother, Kate, and her young son escape from an abusive relationship in the middle of the night. She winds up in this small town, and they settle in. Everything seems to be going fine, and then Christopher, her son, disappears for 6 days and comes back and he seems to be fine and he doesn't remember anything except that he has to build a treehouse in the woods by Christmas or everyone in the town will die. And he has an imaginary friend now to help him. Promise doesn't scare you. The book will. Chbosky actually thanks Stephen King in the beginning of this book for giving so much inspiration, and it's very clear. A lot of the same complicated storylines, a lot of the extra subplots, very beautiful characters, and just like turning everyday things into horrifying images, especially because it's from the perspective of a 7-year-old. Chbosky uses a really cool sense of dramatic irony. I would say the first like 60% of the book is mostly from Christopher's perspective and sometimes from Kate's perspective. And then he starts like throwing in the perspectives of a bunch of other characters in the town. I don't know how he managed to balance, like, I swear it's like 15 different subplots, but he did it. And it's very good. You know exactly who he's talking about at every point. It was like masterfully complex storytelling, and it's just like a beautiful achievement. It's a long ass book. It's like 900 pages. I don't know how I read it in like 3 days. It was probably one of the most engaging books I've ever read. It scared me to death, but I felt like I had to race to the end. I had to know what was happening. Themes, serious religious undertones, a lot of questions about morality, about life and death, certainly about where we go afterwards, if we should care, what being a kid is supposed to be. Again, a lot of theming about expectations in this whole list of books that I've talked about. I definitely seem to like books that discuss our expectations on other people because, I mean, I've experienced that. I'm sure you have as well. There are plenty of unrealistic expectations that the world sets on us. I did kind of call the twist. I actually think you maybe were supposed to. It's hard to tell. My only qualm with it, and it's like not even that big of a deal. The climax of this goddamn book lasts like 250 pages, and I am exaggerating a little bit. It was probably like 200 pages. But still, the climax goes on for so long and the stakes are so high and there is so much going on that I kind of just got like a little numb to it. Just a little bit. By the time the end of the book rolled around, I was like, oh my god, we finally made it. If I hadn't binge read it, it's possible I may not have felt that way. Oh well. The payoff and resolution is definitely earned. You can tell that it took 9 years to write this. It is such a beautiful masterpiece of storytelling. The couple little things wrong with it, not a problem. Go read the book. If you like horror books, go read the book. If you like deer a lot, or you spend a lot of time around deer, maybe don't. It really fucked with me. Please go and check that out. I don't think you will regret it. Whew, oh my gosh, that's it. That is all 11 books. Those were the 11 best books that I read this summer. They are all wonderful. I feel like they span a bunch of different genres. Whatever kind of reader you are, I think you'd probably like one of these books. Feel free to subscribe for some more book content. I'll be having a bunch more out really soon. I'm super excited about it. Thanks for hanging out with me and listening to me talk about books. Let me know what some of your favorite books that you read this summer were. I'd love to hear about it. I'm always looking to expand my ridiculously long TBR. God forbid I ever get to the books on there. It was a pleasure as always, and I will see you guys next time.